Welcome to Think Big with Dan and Qasim. Join hosts Dan Melnick and Qasim Masood as they explore big ideas, limitless possibilities, and engage with visionaries, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders who dare to dream big, get inspired, motivated, and find practical tips for personal growth. Think big, dream bigger, and ignite your potential.
Welcome to Think Big with Dan and Qasim. If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, tell us where you live and what you do.
Hey, I am Constance Wolfe. I live in Lawrence, Kansas, right in the middle of the heartland here in the central USA. I am the owner and founder of Caboodle Services. Caboodle Services is a workspace for natural food CPG brands. And essentially it offers capabilities for all stages of a brand's journey from warehouse to shelf. We kind of like to say what we've done is we've distilled the best practices in the industry, and we've created a SaaS platform that tracks and analyzes and measures all of the common KPIs to succeed in this industry.
Awesome. So I'm just curious about your background. How did you get into the CPG space in the first place?
Yeah, so I'm kind of a serial entrepreneur, to be honest. I was raised in a bed and breakfast growing up, and this was way before, like a million years before Airbnb. You know, we had the very traditional bed and breakfast here in Lawrence, Kansas. So I'm very attuned to, the needs of entrepreneurialism, but I've done a million things. And I had this program here in Lawrence called the Give Back program, and it was a buy local loyalty program. So my idea was, let's reward all the local businesses here in town and create a universal loyalty program where instead of each individual retailer having their own loyalty program, let's combine and make one so that it drives more people to all of the local stores in town. And so that was a really successful program, and I ended up selling that to our local news media and then kind of looking for something to do. And one of my good friends from high school had this really cool restaurant here in town called Local Burger, and she sourced all of her proteins from local farmers. So she had like grass-fed beef, she had bison, she had elk burgers, she had all of these really cool things, and she developed a veggie burger as well. And it was, at the time, it was like there were a bunch of meat analogs that were the veggie burgers, but this was more like quinoa and millet, and it was flash fried and coconut oil, and it had really cool veggies in it, and it was really popular. And somebody's like, you ought to try to sell that in Whole Foods in Kansas City. And she's like, I don't know. But she was like, okay, I'll go over there. And so there was 2 Whole Foods in Kansas City, and she sold them in the local stores, and they would just sell out like crazy. And so they were like, you ought to pitch down at headquarters down in Austin, Texas. She never in her wildest dreams thought this is what she was going to do. Got picked up by Whole Foods nationally. And so she went from her kitchen and her restaurant to national distribution literally overnight, not having any idea what this industry was about. And so I didn't know anything about the industry either, but I was like, let's jump in, let's figure this out. And so we did, and we were able to make it to the #1 veggie patty in our category. Like in 18 months, it was a crazy journey, and we made every mistake you could possibly imagine along the way. So later then investors came in and things changed. And so then I went to another company. So I've been in lots of different brands with lots of different goals. Some went public, some, we went from this little startup I went to a legacy brand that was like #1 in the category, and learning how to maintain my shelf space. But what was consistent is that I learned a little bit about the brand journey at each one of those stages. And there was never like an out-of-the-box platform to kind of walk us through that or house all of the common tools that we use. And so we were using tools all over. And it was, for me, I'm always like, let's make something, let's fix this, let's make it better. And so eventually I ended up creating this platform that kind of pulls in all of the tools and learning all of the systems along the way.
That's awesome. So I was curious, like if you could just share with our audience like on what the brand was, and also just like, I'm curious in terms of, obviously you're not with the company today, but kind of where it's at today.
Yeah, it's had a lot of transitions. So it was Hillary's Eat Well. It was it was so unique in the category because at the time it was meat analogs. So it was like a lot of soy protein and a lot of wheat and a lot of trying to make it look like a burger, which ours wasn't. I mean, it was quinoa and millet and veggies, chopped up veggies, and it was like, and then made formed, I guess is the word I'm looking for, then flash fried. And it was crispy on the outside and just had a ton of flavor. So, investors is a tricky thing. It can be a tricky thing. And so we went through a lot of different investors and a lot of different strategies. And eventually it ended up, I think it's been sold 3 times. Hillary is no longer a part of it as a result of all of those things that can happen. I mean, and it's common. And it's like, we started off with that brand. We were like, our ingredients were the best. Like, it was all about the high quality organic ingredients. And as investors do, it's like they need to turn a better profit and they need to make things different. And sometimes you have to compromise on those things. And so things change. And I don't even know if Hillary's Eat Well, I don't know if that veggie burger is still around. I have not seen it in the stores that I've seen it in.
It's definitely just your earlier point, right? In terms of, things that you've learned. I mean, it seems like that there's, especially with that brand alone, there were so many learnings, so many changes and pivots were happening. It all happened so quickly. And I guess, in what year was this were you working with them?
2010, 11, 12, 13, in that whole time frame. And that's when like the natural food industry was just starting to boom, right at the beginning of that. And so it was really interesting because our acquisition was so fast. I mean, we were getting big accounts really quickly and then having to come back and go, how are we going to fulfill this? How are we going to do this? We ended up, instead of co-packing, we ended up doing our own facility. And that's a whole thing, building that facility. And then every time you think you get the right equipment, you need to get new equipment because of, whatever. It felt like we were constantly chasing, okay, if we could just get that better packaging machine, if we could just get that one more infusion, it was like, it felt like it was a constantly just that, if we could just get to that next stage, but it never ends. It just never ends. It feels like.
Yeah, so I'm curious as well, because you mentioned that obviously after that you've worked with several other CPG brands. So if you can share kind of what those brands were, at least like the category, kind of what that looked.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked because it's such a different experience and set of strategies to employ at different stages of that journey. So that first stage, 0 to number 1, not knowing what we were doing and learning a lot and trying to systematize that whole journey. Then the next one was a non-dairy ice cream brand that had been on shelves already for 10 years and was basically the number 2 brand on every shelf, right? So then that is a whole new thing because if you're already on shelf, then how do you maintain your shelf space? How do you grow your shelf space? And at that time, like about 2 years into that tenure for me, non-dairy ice cream just exploded. The category exploded and all these new brands were coming out of the woodwork. And so it's like, everybody wants to try the new thing, right? And so how do you maintain your shelf space when you have it and not get knocked off? And we were a premium product. Like, we were one of the most expensive products on shelf. And so how do you justify that to the consumer? How do you justify that to the category managers, and how do you maintain that space? And that's when I started getting into data. And so the analytics and understanding and studying and figuring out, okay, what price point do we need to be on our promotions? Like, are we going to get as much lift off a 50-cent, promotion than we do $1? Like, yeah, actually we're leaving money on the table. We don't need to go to $1 off, those sorts of like aha moments we started having with that brand. And so completely different than going and getting shelf space. Maintaining your shelf space, I could argue, is almost harder.
Constance, thanks so much for your time today.